So this morning what I want to share with you is my life in the context of my journey of understanding the intersection of faith and work. I call it the 7 stages of my journey to Integriosity, which I'll tell you about more later. But just to start out, so I can get a kind of a sense of who's in the room, if you're in full-time Christian ministry, could you raise your hand? Okay, we have about a half a dozen, 8 guys. I was like you. I was clueless. Not the guys who raised their hands, the guys who didn't raise their hands. Did you know that only 5 to 9% of Christians understand the intersection of faith and work and understand that every single one of you is in full-time Christian ministry? Your works are your mission field. Up at NCS New Canaan, when guys go into a new job, we commission them into that new position like a church would commission a missionary. Do not be fooled, do not be deceived to believe that the guys who raise their hand have a higher calling than you do. You are all missionaries. This is where God put you, and I'll tell you how it took me 16 years to understand that, 58 years really to understand that. I start with stage 1. Stage 1 I call no intersection, shallow faith and dreams. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. We were raised in a Catholic tradition. I went to church every Sunday. I was an altar boy from 8 to 18. And I knew at 8 years old that I wanted to be a lawyer. I knew at 8 years old I wanted to go to Harvard, and I knew at 8 years old I wanted to go to Harvard Law School. I don't know why. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I didn't even know any lawyers. It was just somewhere in my heart that was what I wanted to do, and I just knew it for sure. When I was confirmed, and this is first prophecy, the first prophecy I received, which I only realized a year or so ago. When I was confirmed, the bishop went down the line of us as we finished he left, and he went down the line and he said, congratulations, 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 congratulations. And he came to me, he looked me in the eye, and he said, congratulations, you're going to be a priest one day. Congratulations, congratulations, congratulations. I thought the guy was nuts because I knew I was going to be a lawyer. And that has nothing to do with being a priest. What is he thinking? It was a total disconnect for me, the idea that being a lawyer could have anything to do with being a priest. Stage 2. Oh, by the way, at 8, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. At 13, I figured out the law firm I wanted to work for in New York once I got out of Harvard Law School. Stage 2, all work, living the dream. I pursued my education and my career completely unburdened by worries of how faith might impact it. I got into Harvard College. I then got into Harvard Law School. I then got a job at that law firm I identified at 13 years old, Cravath, Swin & Moore. I became a partner in that firm. I married a wonderful woman, and we had these 2 beautiful kids. There were angels along the way who I never understood until years later, like the owner of the factory where my father worked, who when I had gotten into Harvard and was deciding not to go because of the financial burden on my parents, called me from New Jersey one day and said, the reason for my call is just to tell you that if you decide to go to Harvard, I'll make sure it's never a financial burden on your parents, a Jewish owner of this company, where my father had worked for 40 years. Or the admissions officer at Harvard who I found out had come to Harvard a year before I got in. She left a year after I got in. She was from a small farming community in upstate New York and had a heart for kids in upstate New York. You know, I think God had a plan. So live that dream. But, I got to my office. I became a partner. And my whole life was aimed at this from 8 years old. And I remember sitting there in this office at this big desk and thinking, gosh, it should feel better than this, shouldn't it? I mean, this is my entire life has been aimed at this day. And here I'm going to sit, and I don't know what's next. Okay, BJ. Stage 3. So it's been all work. Now the faith ramp-up begins. This stage is called Hit by a Sledgehammer. In 2003, my wife said these words to me. I'm not happy. I can't go on like this. And I knew in that moment that there was something very profound in those words. And I just broke down. And I just cried. And when it happened, I saw this vision go by, and it was not a vision of what my life was. It was a film reel of what I wanted my life to be, and I had the sense it was not going to happen. It was my life with my kids, my life with her. And in that moment, I had this realization that I was facing something that I could not control with the tools that I had used to so well control my world, which for me were hard work, money, and intelligence. Those were my control tools. You know, on the outside, I had a perfect life. I'm sure a life that many Americans would gladly trade for. I had a great career, a beautiful family, great house in Darien. But behind the walls of that house, our marriage was in this slow death spiral, and it had been, and I'd been denying it. And my wife was desperately unhappy, desperately lonely. My career was my focus. I believed that if I was a good provider, I was by definition a good husband and a good father. And I wasn't working. And with that realization that I couldn't control this, I did something I had never really done in a long time. I cried out to God to help me. And through a series of bizarre coincidences, within 2 weeks, he led me to this house in New Canaan, Connecticut, where there are 200 men meeting in a room, listening to worship music and hearing about this guy, Jesus. And NCS men came around me. BJ started counseling us, but guys came around. The speakers taught me about Jesus and his promises and who he is and who I was meant to be as a husband and a father. These guys walked with me through, and December 5th of 2003, BJ led me to give my life to the Lord. And these men walked with me through a very difficult year. In November of 2004, when people were telling me it was hopeless, it was impossible that my wife would ever come back, that she had moved on with her life, God turned her heart around in 24 hours, miraculously. That story, which I'm not going to get into, is actually in Eric Metaxas' book, Miracles. It's a chapter called God and Marriage, which goes into the detail of that, of NCS and how guys came around me. If anybody's interested in that story, I'd be happy to send you a PDF copy of that chapter. I encourage you to read the book. It's a great book. But if you don't want to go give money to Eric, just leave me your card, your email, and I'll send you a copy of the chapter. So God hit me by a sledgehammer, and faith was now the focus of my life. So stage 4, a Christian at work, absolutely clueless. What do I do? I'm a Christian, and I'm a lawyer. What does that mean? What does that mean day to day? And here are the 4 kind of stages, mistakes that I think we go through. And this is what I went through. Agonize, individualize, monetize, and cosmeticize. I agonized. I had no idea what to do. I was lost. Well, then I individualized it. Well, it's about being a better person, being ethical, being moral, being kinder to people, looking for opportunities to pray for people. It was about just my own personal behavior. And then it was monetized. Well, I should give away more money. I'm making money. We should give away more. That's a good thing. And that's being a Christian. And then cosmeticize. I'm going to put a Bible on my bookshelf. Maybe somebody will notice it. I'll get one of those little fish pins and put it on my jacket and see if someone notices that, right? But really had no idea what to do. By the way, that Bible, in several years, only one person noticed that Bible. He was an IT guy who came in to fix my computer. And he's looking, he goes, Mr. Michalski, are you a Christian? And I said, yes. It was the first one, right? You notice? And he said, me too. He said, I've had to fix every partner's computer, and I've gone through every office. You're the only one who has a Bible on his shelf. I was proud in that 30 seconds. But I didn't get it. I didn't get it. So how did God get me to the next stage? That's stage 5. Work removed into the wilderness. In 2009, I had what I call my Abraham moment. Through a series of things, God made it very clear to me and to my wife that he had a different plan for my life, and I was meant to leave that career. And so in 2009, I left it, and I said, okay, God, here I am. Now what? What is it? 2 weeks later, Jim Lane called me up, and he said, I've been doing NCS for 13 years. I'm burnt out. If I were to take a 6-month sabbatical, would you take over NCS for me? So I thought, okay, maybe that's the next thing. And so I did that for about a year. And I gave God a deadline. I thought it was generous. I said, I'll give you 6 months, Lord, to show me this next plan before I try to figure it out myself. Well, that was a joke. We were sharing our marriage testimony once at a marriage conference, my wife and I was telling people, unconditional love is what it says it is. It's unconditional. You can't put conditions on it. For example, you can't put a time limit on it. You can't say, God, fix my spouse in 6 months or I'm out of this marriage. And as I was saying those words, I heard a voice inside me say, it doesn't only go for your marriage. And I realized that I might be in for a longer haul than 6 months. In this period, I also was searching for a new identity. I didn't realize how much my identity was wrapped up in my career. I mean, what is the first thing anybody asks you when you meet at a cocktail party? What do you do? And all of a sudden, I didn't have a do. I'll never forget the picture, I'm forgetting his name now, the San Francisco Giant, Dave Dravecki, the San Francisco Giants pitcher whose arm broke when he was pitching once, right? He came and spoke at NCS a number of years ago. He said, my identity was Dave Dravecki, pitcher for the San Francisco Giants. He said, and he even had it on a card. He had his baseball card. He said, and then one day, and he only had one arm, and one day he put this in his teeth and he tore the baseball card in half, and he said that identity was gone, and I didn't know who I was. And he's asked us, what's on your card? And what are you going to do if one day that card is ripped in half? And I was lost. And I didn't realize that NCS became the new identity I adopted so that I could tell people who I was because I needed something. And I was in that search. Stage 6, the 10-year wilderness journey, which I call bringing faith and work together. So I got very involved in New Canaan Society leadership. As Tom mentioned, that year I led NCS, I was on the board. Jim and I sat down side by side and wrote that mission statement that was on the screen that you guys see here. Put together the structure when NCS began to grow. Worked with Jim to put in place the structure for chapters nationwide and the tax exemption and how chapters would form and the relationships between national and chapters. Through NCS, I also was leading our effort with partnerships with other organizations. And it was through that I got involved in the faith and work movement and began to understand the intersection of faith and work and what it meant. I got involved with Movement Day and got involved with the groups of marketplace ministries, other ministries around the country that NCS we would connect with and learn from each other. I got involved in a lot of different nonprofits over the last decade. There was a second prophecy that came in 2008 before God showed me I was supposed to leave the law firm. And that prophecy was an NCS guy who called me up one day and he said, God's been downloading this thing to me. I've written it down. I have a message I have to give you. Can I come over? And he came over, and the gist of it was, you're supposed to start a Christian law firm where greed is not the creed, serving clients for whom greed is not the creed. I thanked him, tucked it away, but it really didn't do anything for me. 2012, 4 years later, he calls me up. He says, have you done anything about that? I said, no. And he gave me a few more thoughts, and I tucked it away. But this time I prayed about it. I had some time now. I prayed, and I really felt God say, yes, you're supposed to do that, and you're supposed to do it with people like, and he gave me 2 names. And they were 2 NCS guys. But I didn't tell anybody except my wife, wrote it down, put it away. That's 2012. 2014, one of the 2 guys whose names I wrote down called my wife and said that he and the other guy whose name I'd written down wanted to talk about starting a Christian law firm. Did she think I'd have any interest in joining their conversation? That's when I said, okay, I give up. And we began down this road of doing this, but within the course of a year, the 2 of them got called off to other things. And there I was on my own. And I had to reflect on what was this about. Well, in that process, and at a retreat of a group up in Bridgeport called the We Want More House, we went through an exercise to come up with a personal mission statement. And my personal mission statement is the following: to serve by redeeming work through the impartation of wisdom, spotlighting God's truth and connecting its meaning to organizational cultures and practices. I finally came to understand that Bishop's prophetic word. I can be a lawyer and a priest at the same time. 1 Peter 2:9 tells us, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. We are all, gentlemen, high priests, prophets, and kings. And don't let anyone steal that from you and deceive you into believing that is not true. And so what this ended up turning into was a vision I call Integrous. That is stage 7, living out my purpose. Integrous was born of the recognition that the faith and work movement had no shortage of content, conferences, and coaches. But what it didn't seem to have a dearth of were advisors who could really understand what a business was going through and could advise leaders who were serious about integrating their faith and their work together and then walk with them as an advisor through the daily decisions that they're going to make with a sole role of helping them remember who they said they wanted to be, helping them remember who they said their companies wanted. They wanted their companies to be. And that was the vision behind Integrous. The mission of Integrous is to humanize people, add to the beauty of the world, and glorify God by encouraging and assisting the pursuit of integriosity by organizations and leaders. Integriosity is a word I made up. It's a combination of integrity and generosity. And it's a state that exists when an organization has an alignment between its vision and its principles and values and biblical principles and values, and then a culture that reflects those values and also reinforces those values. When that alignment exists in the organization, that is Integriosity. And that's what I want to help people achieve. Sorry, this is just something weird on my screen. It's not on the big screen. I believe there are 3 divine purposes of work: to humanize people, to beautify the world, and to glorify God. And that is the purpose of business. And there are 4 steps to Integriosity. I won't get into them. One is renew. Renew your mind about the purpose of work and business. Once you get that, reimagine your organization in light of that renewed understanding, and then begin to realign the organization and its culture to fit that reimagined vision. And finally, restore. Begin to see the restoration. There are 3 key mind shifts that have to go on. One is to understand that the end of business is not profit. It is the flourishing of people. Profit is a necessary means. Without it, you don't have a sustainable organization. But if it is the end, then by definition, people can never be more than tools of production to be managed and maximized. That's the why. The what is that you do not have to be overt. There are continuums from the covert to the overt as you step out into this. And it may be right to be at a covert end, in which case it may look a lot like what you do in this organization, may look a lot like what an enlightened secular business will do. The difference is the why. They're doing it because at the end of the day they've determined that it's good for the bottom line, or that they have some gnawing feeling of doing good, but they don't understand what it's about. But we know, and you know, that it's because that's what God has called you to do and how He's called you to live your life. And the final is the who, the identity. You need to see yourself based upon who you are and not what you do, and who you are as a follower of Jesus Christ. Do not be a Christian banker. Do not be a Christian lawyer. Because if you are, the noun in that is banker and lawyer, and the little adjective is Christian. And your priority is to turn around. Be a follower of Christ, currently disguised or currently engaged in banking or in law or in real estate or whatever it might be you're doing. Hold lightly to that modifier of what you're doing, because you will sacrifice your secondary identity to preserve your primary identity. If your primary identity is your career, you will sacrifice your faith to maintain that. Get the order right. It may sound like semantics, but I think it's more than semantics. So here are some lessons that I've learned in the process of this, and I'll go through these very quickly. First, priorities. My priorities were upside down. For me, it was work, children, spouse, and God. It was absolutely upside down. And in that, don't confuse work and God. People, particularly people who are in ministry provisions in churches, often think that their work is God, and they put it ahead of their families. We talked about identity. Your primary identity is a follower of Jesus. There's a bigger gospel. If you haven't heard about a 4-chapter versus a 2-chapter gospel, I encourage you to look into it. There are 4, if you look at God's story, there are 4 big chapters. Right? There's creation, fall, the redemption through Jesus, and then God's restoration of the world. Our churches have often truncated that to the middle 2. You're a sinner, Jesus came to save you. If you do that, you miss why we're here, and you miss where we're going. And if you don't see why we're here, you don't understand that in Genesis it tells you why work is sacred. And it's part of being human, and it has intrinsic kingdom value. It is, and no job is more sacred than any other job. Work is part of our faith, not vice versa. You talk about work-life balance. I don't think there is a such thing as work-life balance. There's life. And it's all part of it. You also miss the second half. You miss that God is restoring this world, and everything you do either moves the world a little bit closer to the beauty that He intended and that He's heading us to, or it moves it a little way away. We don't know why we're here, and we don't know where we're going unless we see it all. People. If you don't read the first part, if you don't read creation, you don't understand we're all made in the image of God, and that everybody you encounter deserves to be treated with dignity. Amen. And that God loves people more. Amen. Grace for others. I've learned that everybody is doing the best they can. This is from Brene Brown. If we really believe that, given the circumstances, that they're doing the best they can, even if it's pretty cruddy, it's a lot easier to have grace for them. Grace for me is Tim Keller's phrase, there's no plan B. I believe that God never wakes up and says, crap, I can't believe Paul did that today. I never thought of that one. Now I got to go back to the drawing board and rewrite his life plan. I believe he knew my screw-ups long before I made them, and his plan for my life actually takes account of my screw-ups. My story isn't the story. I often tell myself what people are saying or thinking, and if I step back and say, is this just my story, or is this the real story? The journey, make sure you're running to something and not running from something. And once you discover in Egypt that you're supposed to be getting away from, stop longing for it. Commitment, when God calls, burn the bridge and slaughter the ox. Move forward in what He calls you to. Trust, don't forget in the dark what God showed you in the light, because there will be darkness and you'll be tempted to leave the path. Provision, a faucet is not a source of water. A faucet is a distribution mechanism of water from a gigantic reservoir. Your job is a faucet. It is not a reservoir. And God can turn your faucet off and turn another one on in a blink of an eye. And if you're not looking for that other faucet, you're going to be depressed and you're going to be trying to figure out how to get the old one to work, and he stopped the old one. Obedience, follow rabbit trails even if you can't see a rabbit. If it looks like God's putting an opportunity in front of you and it doesn't make sense, just pursue it, because it may be around 6 corners before you figure out why he actually led you down that path. Contentment, there are no worse things, just things that God has allowed that we don't yet understand. Presence, the one I will leave you with here, is our today is robbed by our expectation of a tomorrow. I went to a course once and they said, imagine, what would you do if you knew you had 30 days to live? Particularly, what would you do in the relationships in your life? And when you figure it out, go do it. Because as Tom said, we don't know we have tomorrow. And it's only with God's grace we have tomorrow. So let's live our lives in the present, embracing as much as we can what we have. So I want to finish the way I started. How many of you are in full-time Christian ministry? Good. Thanks, guys.